If a movie ever showed you how a caveman died, chances are it was a saber-tooth tiger, a fall off a cliff, or a spear fight gone wrong. Dramatic, sudden, cinematic, and almost certainly not how most people in the Stone Age actually died. Researchers who study the last remaining hunter-gatherer societies on Earth, the closest living window we have into how early humans actually lived and died, have spent decades tracking exactly this. Cause by cause, group by group, they built something close to a real ranking of what was most likely to kill you if you'd been born into that world instead of this one. A wide shot of a small band moving across an open plain at dusk, unaware, ordinary, no drama in the frame at all, because that's closer to the truth than the highlight reel version we usually imagine. So today, we're counting it down. 5 ways you were statistically most likely to die in the Stone Age, ranked from least to most likely. Some of them will surprise you. Some of them are the reason humans still flinch at things that on paper barely register as dangerous today. One thing to say before we start, none of this means Stone Age life was miserable or short by definition. Someone who survived childhood in these societies could often live into their 60s or 70s, genuinely comparable to modern life expectancy. The danger wasn't spread evenly across a lifetime. It was concentrated, brutally, at specific points, and understanding where those points were tells you almost everything about what daily life actually felt like underneath the survival instinct we still carry around with us today. This isn't guesswork or dramatized reconstruction either. Much of what we know comes from 2 overlapping sources: skeletal remains that preserve direct physical evidence of injury, disease, and stress, and decades of careful fieldwork among the small number of hunter-gatherer societies that still exist today, whose patterns of life and death give researchers a living comparison point for populations that left no written record of their own. Let's start at number 5, the one Hollywood loves most and reality respects least. Number 5. Animal attacks and accidents. Yes, it happened. Falls, drownings, the occasional confrontation with a large predator defending territory. But here's the part the movies leave out. These events were relatively rare, not because early humans were reckless, but because they weren't. Generations of accumulated knowledge about terrain, animal behavior, and seasonal danger meant most bands avoided the kind of catastrophic cinematic death we associate with caveman life almost entirely. Predators generally avoid groups of alert humans carrying weapons and fire. The danger was real, but it ranks lower than almost anyone assumes. A hunter pausing at a river's edge, scanning the water and the opposite bank carefully before stepping in. Caution, not chaos, defining the moment. Number 4. Nutritional stress and seasonal famine. This one rarely gets a dramatic death scene because it wasn't dramatic, it was slow, and it was seasonal. Certain times of year, particularly the transition between seasons when stored food ran low and new sources hadn't yet appeared, brought real caloric and nutrient shortages. It didn't usually kill outright on its own. Instead, it weakened the body enough that something else, an infection, an injury, childbirth, became far more likely to finish the job. Anthropologists studying skeletal remains from this period can actually see the evidence of this directly. Growth interruptions in bones and teeth, physical markers of seasons where the body simply wasn't getting enough. This is part of why ranking causes of death in this era gets complicated. Famine rarely killed alone. It was the quiet multiplier sitting underneath almost everything else on this list, making every other danger slightly more lethal than it would have been on a full stomach. A body weakened by a lean season fought off infection worse, healed from injury slower, and survived childbirth with less margin for error. Which brings us to something that on its own should barely be dangerous at all, and somehow, for most of human history, absolutely was. Number 3. Infection. Not disease in the abstract, a cut, a scrape, a broken bone that broke the skin on its way out. In a world with no antibiotics, no sterile bandages, no concept of germ theory, an injury that would send you home from urgent care today with a week of pills could spiral over days into something that killed you. Close-up on a small wound being packed with crushed plant matter and wrapped in hide. Careful hands, working with whatever knowledge the group had, real but limited, against an invisible enemy no one could see or name. This is genuinely one of the strangest gaps between then and now. A hunting injury, a bite from a small animal, even a bad tooth abscess, today routine, then potentially fatal, and not quickly. Infections could take days or weeks to run their course, meaning this wasn't usually a fast death. It was often a slow, visible decline the entire group watched happen, with remedies that sometimes helped and often simply weren't enough. Skeletal evidence from this period backs this up directly. Archaeologists studying ancient remains find healed fractures constantly, proof that plenty of injuries were survived. But they also find signs of infection that clearly won, bone damage consistent with illness that spread before anything could stop it. The difference between healing and dying often came down to something as simple as which part of the body got hurt, how deep the wound went, and whether the group had access to the right plants at the right time of year. It's a sobering thought. Modern medicine has made this entire category of danger, one of the biggest killers for most of human history, almost an afterthought. We forget how recent that change actually is. Antibiotics have existed for less than 100 years, a blink compared to the roughly 300,000 years modern humans have existed without them. For nearly the entire span of our species, a small wound really could be a death sentence, and everyone alive knew it.
Number 2. Violence. And this is the one where the answer genuinely depends on which group of hunter-gatherers researchers are studying, which is itself revealing. Some documented societies show relatively low rates of lethal violence between people. Others show numbers that are honestly staggering. In a few well-studied groups, interpersonal violence accounts for roughly a third to over half of all recorded deaths among certain populations. Two groups facing each other across an open clearing at a distance, tension held in stillness rather than motion, neither side moving first. Why the huge range? Territory, resource scarcity, and social structure all played a role. Groups competing hard for limited hunting grounds or facing repeated contact with rival bands saw violence become a genuine, persistent threat, not just from outside conflict, but sometimes within the group itself, tied to disputes over status, resources, or relationships. Other groups with more space, more resources, or different social norms around conflict resolution saw comparatively little of it. This variability matters because it pushes back against two lazy stereotypes at once, the idea that prehistoric life was constant brutal warfare and the opposite idea that it was some kind of peaceful utopia before civilization supposedly ruined everything. Neither one holds up. The honest answer is that violence was a real, sometimes major, cause of death, but how major depended entirely on the specific circumstances a group found itself in, the same way it still does today, just with very different stakes and very different weapons. It's also worth noting how violence and the earlier causes on this list often overlapped. A wound from a conflict became an infection. A group weakened by a lean season became more vulnerable to raids from rivals facing the same shortage. None of these 5 causes really operated in isolation. They stacked quietly on top of each other, and which one technically finished the job often had as much to do with timing and circumstance as with any single dramatic event. Which leaves one cause left, the one that more than any other single factor shaped how short or long human lives actually were for most of our history. Number 1. Childbirth and infancy.
Not a dramatic hunting accident, not a violent conflict. The single largest cause of death across nearly every studied hunter-gatherer population was the process of being born and the first few fragile years that followed it. For infants, the numbers are genuinely hard to sit with. In many of these societies, a significant portion of children didn't survive to see their 5th birthday, let alone adulthood. Infection, malnutrition, complications no one had the tools to treat. The earliest years of life were, statistically, the most dangerous years a person would ever live through by a wide margin. A quiet close-up on hands gently wrapping a newborn in soft hide, firelight flickering low, tenderness and fragility held in the same frame. And for mothers, the danger didn't end there. Childbirth itself, without modern medical intervention, carried a real and significant risk of death, hemorrhage, infection, complications during delivery that today would be resolved in an operating room within the hour. This single factor, more than violence, more than animal attacks, more than any other cause on this list, is the real reason average life expectancy figures from this era look so low. It's not that a 30-year-old was considered ancient, it's that so many lives ended before they properly began, dragging the average down dramatically, while pulling attention away from something equally true. Those who survived childhood and childbirth stood a genuinely good chance of living a long, full life by any standard, ancient or modern. That's the real shape of Stone Age mortality, not a constant gauntlet of predators and spears, but a handful of specific, survivable if you're lucky thresholds, faced early, faced often, and faced without a single tool we now take completely for granted. It's also, in its own way, a strangely hopeful ranking. Almost nothing on this list was about bad luck striking at random. It was about a handful of specific, identifiable moments in a life. Birth, early childhood, a wound, a lean season, where a little more knowledge, a little more medicine, or a little more food would have changed everything. We eventually built exactly that. It just took most of human history to get there. If rankings like this interest you, Kindled breaks down a different piece of prehistoric life every week, the parts nobody taught you in school.